We can probably all agree that dating overall has gotten more difficult over time. These difficulties are quite varied depending on who you ask, and it kind of seems like nobody really knows why this feeling is so widespread. I can say personally that dating to me feels a bit hollow, and I don't think I would meet dating standards in a more typical setting. I'm not bad looking, but I am pretty autistic. I am not likely to make that perfect first impression that I feel is expected of me, at least nowadays. So, if most people can agree that dating seems harder, why is there no consensus on the reason? Great question. I did some thinky with my big gigantic mutant brain and came up with a possible explanation for a lot of different modern issues that we feel. The internet has become a massive part of our lives, and it continues to be an increasingly larger influence on the world as a whole. This has its own pros and cons, and one of the most major drawbacks that came to mind was the way that it could change our decision making processes. Think for a second how you decide what to pay attention to online. Everything online is competing for your attention to some degree, and you can't reasonably pay equal attention to all of it. This means you need to make quick decisions on what's worth your time, often within seconds. The more time we spend online and dealing with modern advertising techniques, the more we train our brains to make those snap judgments on what is worth our time. When we start to use a mental skill on a regular basis, it starts to bleed into other aspects of our lives. I've experienced this myself with many different skills I've picked up. They don't stay within the domain they come from, and thinking patterns transfer across areas without even trying. That's just how our brains work. You may know where I'm going with this, but here's the real question. How does this snap judgment skill necessary online affect other areas of our lives? It is my thought that this thinking pattern created by the internet is starting to bleed through into our relationships and our connections with other people. There is a whole generation of people who grew up with the internet, and that means that these quick judgment thinking patterns are cemented. They are the default. We can see and feel the effects of this shift in the overall dating world, but it's too subtle and too gradual for us to properly notice until it's already causing issues, right about now. If we collectively learn to make quicker decisions about what we spend our time on, it seems perfectly logical that we would also make quicker decisions about who we spend our time on. This creates a lot more problems because when you try to compress your understanding of people the same way that you do with online content, then you lose the ability to see the full picture. If you only give people one interaction, one conversation, 10 minutes, their online profile, whatever brief first impression is possible, then you are filtering out a large chunk of people who may be more awkward or not the greatest communicators. It compresses the entire outcome to this first impression, and it adds a lot of extra pressure to an already awkward situation for the majority of people. It encourages people to be dishonest, number one, and it enables smooth talkers who can act charismatic for a good first impression, not an honest first impression, number two. Another thing is that you're also working against how most long-term relationships actually develop. The true character of a person comes through with repeated interactions, and this repetition builds trust through the consistency of those interactions. With trust comes a sort of comfortable familiarity, and that deeper sense of attraction can grow from that familiarity. That's generally what people are talking about when they describe real chemistry they feel with someone. It's a sort of connection that can't be decided on immediately. It has to be given a chance to develop on its own. If people don't allow time for this process, then dating as a whole is likely going to feel hollow, because it is. Then the willingness to date at all goes down, and then the smaller dating pool makes it seem even harder to find someone, and it just reinforces itself as a negative feedback loop. This is also not me saying that first impressions should be ignored. Some people are just bad news, and they make it readily apparent immediately through their actions or their words. What I'm emphasizing is that a first impression doesn't need to wow you or feel right immediately, because it almost never does, even when you consider the stories of how married couples meet each other. It's usually a pretty mundane story. My parents met in a grocery store because my dad was a cashier and my mom ran into him enough times going there. Just for reference. The origins of deeper connections are usually pretty mundane, even absurdly simple in premise. That's just how it tends to work out, because it's the repetition and consistency that matters the most when it comes to genuine relationships. There are a lot of people who want genuine connections and long-lasting relationships, myself included, but it's not often that people like me, who are more awkward or a bit rough, are given enough time to be seen fully and understood. Now, I could be more proactive, that's true, but my point is that the internet is changing everybody's expectations slowly but surely. We seek the deep connection first and forget that deeper connections come from time and consistency. People don't really decide to be together. They grow closer the more they talk to each other and the more that they learn about each other. People only make that decision to be officially together once the connection is actually grown and is there. Awkward first interactions, fumbled introductions, and those uncomfortable moments of silence where neither of you knows what to say next are how relationships actually start for, basically everybody. You can't skip the uncomfortable part, because that mutual discomfort is the precursor to a stronger connection. It should feel kind of nerve-wracking, kind of awkward, and not at all perfect, because that's how you know you actually care about the outcome and about creating something that's real. So, in essence, give people a chance so long as they aren't throwing off red flags, and be prepared to take your time getting to know somebody before you can figure out whether or not there's any chemistry. Some people fit together better than others, and part of what makes it so awkward is that you have to feel it out and see how compatible you actually are with someone. Nobody is really wrong when they express that dating is harder, but we have yet to reach the point where we know what's changing so we can adapt to it. The internet isn't going anywhere, so I think we should try to understand more about how it affects our thinking and perception of the offline world. If you want my advice, for whatever strange reason, my advice is very simple. Allow yourself and others to be awkward and sincere in attempts to connect. Real life dating basically never looks as nice as stories and media lead us to believe sometimes. There's not always a spark, it's more like a little burning ember that grows as time goes on. Join some groups, talk to people, and allow for consistency to do what it does best. Be open to the idea that you may find a surprisingly good match with someone you may not have considered at first glance. You can have your standards, but allow yourself to get to know somebody better before you write them off completely. Life moves quickly in certain ways, and dating is not one of those things. The slow burn romance is humanity's default, if that makes it any easier to understand. The internet trains our brains to default to speed and quick decisions, so I suppose the real lesson here is the value of patience. How realistically cliche